Hey guys, you can check out this word. I put it on Extreme Dream around here. There we go. I'm having internet challenges and I haven't taught you in a while. I'm sorry it's so late, but I just flew in from Taiwan. So that's my excuse for being off schedule. But here's a verse, man. Go to extremedream.com. You can read what I was writing about. There's a door opening and there are many adversaries. This is the Feast of Purim coming up. And it's going to be like within a week, within a couple of days, 4 days. And it's really an interesting spiritual time because this is the time when Hamon was going to spring the trap on Esther. And I remember a year ago, I was just randomly going through the Bible and I saw the dates for the Feast of Purim and for the exposure of Hamon. And I really felt something was beginning a year ago that was going to be an unraveling of, we've been in such a battle over the United States and we're certainly, not finished. It's like everything's coming to the surface. But the word for us is, while we're observing what's happening in the nation, we have to know God is moving in the nations all over the earth right now. There's a season of visitation that's happening, and it's unique and it's different than the seasons we've had in the past for those that are kind of charismatically oriented. Check out Acts 16, because here's the key for this particular time. If you go to Acts 16, there it is. I don't know if this is backwards for you. For dyslexics, you'll be able to read it. But it says that in verse 6, Paul was going through the region of Galatia, and he was forbidden. Now, this is fascinating. He was forbidden from being able to, by the Holy Ghost, to preach the word in Asia. That's interesting because right now Asia is the place where so much of the word is going forth. But he was forbidden to go to Asia. And as they were attempting to go to Mysia, as they tried to go to Bithynia, the Spirit of Jesus resisted them. This is interesting. 2 times the Spirit of God is resisting. You might wonder why you're not seeing certain things happen. Well, you never know when God is protecting you from a premature opportunity in the wrong direction. In other words, you might be able to go somewhere, but that somewhere isn't your highest and best. You don't always, an open door isn't always God, and a closed door isn't always the devil. Write that one down, because that's what this says. But then Paul gets a vision. Thank God for the supernatural. He gets a vision that appears in the night, and there stands a man of Macedonia praying to him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." Now, what's interesting here is the Macedonian obviously hadn't heard the gospel, so it wasn't like a preacher saying, "Come preach to us." It was the cry of someone who doesn't even know the gospel, who's saying, "Come help us." And the word for help us there in the Greek is really an importunate word. It's the pleading. Please come and help us. So what I want you to see is one of the keys for transition in this season. This is so really important, is that you need to look for the need that seeks you out. Look for the person that seeks you out. Who is coming to you for help? The Macedonian cry is when somebody or something is coming onto your calendar, onto your phone. And you want to be really discerning about saying no to stuff because just because it isn't in your business or in your lane or what you're looking for. That could be a trick because God sometimes tests us by our availability. Remember, you're supposed to be, like James says, don't say, "I'm going to do this year and make money in this city and go to that city," but say, "If the Lord wills." In other words, we should take all things and say, "Lord, just before I, move into the left or right, I want to make sure, is this you or isn't this you?" And so these principles here, the 4 keys to transitioning in your assignment, are keys I'm going to be focusing on in San Diego, May 23rd through 26th, because I see relationships. During this Feast of Purim, it was relationships that saved the nation. It was Mordecai who was overt, out of the box. It was Esther who was covert. It was the arming of the nameless citizens to rise up and protect themselves. It was advance warning regarding Haman's plot. It was the fasting and prayer that was going on with Esther and her entourage for her to have favor, to be able to win and going for an appeal that would go to the king which wouldn't be an appeal that could overrule the attack that was coming to her nation. We can't overrule what's coming to America in terms of stopping it from happening. But we can prevail so that God will move through us in the crises. In other words, there was going to be an attack that was going to come through Hamon. But notice, the Jews didn't have to be ill-equipped and they didn't have to be caught off guard. They were ready and they preserved their freedom because they knew how to respond to the attack when the attack came. So the court of heaven, if you want to put it that way, the appeal to heaven didn't cancel Haman's assault. It created the scenario where God's people could overcome their enemies. And so it was an overruling of the gallows so that they weren't hung on them, but they were given a chance to defend their life, their liberty, and their freedom. And this is where America's heading in 2020. I mean, it's so clear. But investing in that which is another person's may be the invitation of God to position you for the very next door that you're going through. Being able to be sensitive to the need that's coming to you. So write down extremedream.com because that's going to be our 23rd to the 26th is what I'm going to be focusing on that. And I put together I wrote that as you walk through the door, and you can almost hear it, it's the sound of a reset in your life. Things the enemy robbed from you are now coming back. Things that were taken from you, relationships, opportunities, expectations are being recycled. Some of them in new relationships, others in restored relationships. Many of you that have been praying for prodigals and almost ready to throw the towel in, tell you something. We're seeing the prodigals and the intervention of God turning the hearts and restoring families in a remarkable way. And we're watching the Spirit of the Lord moving to restore that which has been stolen and taken. And I truly believe that as Paul responded to that cry that was coming to him and accepted the fact that the resistance that he had in other places was God resisting him and not the devil, then he could go through. What's interesting here is he wasn't alone because it says right here that after he had seen that vision in the night, immediately, it says, we endeavored to go to Macedonia, assuredly gathering the Lord had called us to preach the gospel. I love how God can give Paul the vision, and Luke says, we all felt it was our call too. So you all don't have to have the same vision. You have to be able to be aligned with people that are getting the divine vision, and you go through with them. So they loosed from Troas and they went there to Philippi. Now, Philippi was a chief city. This was a capital city. This was the greatest jewel in the Greek crown in terms of arts, education, and achievement. But it was spiritually a dead end, crying out for Jesus and calling forth for an apostle to go. Now, it's interesting when they get there, the first thing they do is they go in verse 13 to a place where prayer is wont to be made. I like that. Once they know their geography, they just show up. Sometimes all you got to do is show up. Proximity is power. You got to be there. And when you're there, angels go to work. And the divine appointments get set up as you're seeking God in the place that God called you to go. So remember that. Extreme dream. God is wanting you to live the extreme dream and not settle for less. Extremedream.com is where I put some of this information. So on the Sabbath, they went to go pray. And what happens? A woman named Lydia, who is a seller of purple goods from Thyatira, the Lord opened her heart. Now, a couple of things are interesting here. It's a business person, but check it out. It's a woman. God raises up a female marketplace woman. Purple is the garment of the rich. Therefore, she was tailoring and clothing an aristocracy. She was in the fashion industry, you might say. And so the seller of purple goods in the city, God opens her heart, divine appointment. As they pray, they don't have much of a plan. They know where they're called to go. They go, they push through the discouragement of the adversaries they ran into that were blocking them, and the Lord was using to position them for the right door. And then the Lord opens her heart. I like that too. It's kind of like You understand why Calvinists really believe it's all the Lord that does it, because if God doesn't open, you ever talk to someone whose heart has not been open, you know what it's like when God opens a heart. You see the grace of God's there. She's baptized with her whole house. They were really into baptism back then. I think we should think about that. And so they're abiding in her house. Now they've got what we call a micro church. It's a gathering of the marketplace with the apostolic in a home. Now from there they go back to the place of prayer, and they have another divine appointment. Who the heck is it this time? A demon-possessed person. You see, you're like a magnet. You're going to attract who God sends, and then even the devil will send people. But here's the interesting thing. If the devil sends them, and it's part of God's blueprint for you to be there, God will use the attack to position you for a greater power in that territory. So she is like demonized, and she's attaching herself to Paul. It's almost like being trolled by social media. And it's just blah, blah, blah. These people, and so it's giving this false advertising, and it's smearing them, and it's grieving Paul because it's the wrong voice to be associated with their work. And it's advertising. And because this woman was a soothsayer who made money for her bosses by having a weird capacity to predict marketplace trends. And so Paul turns around being agitated after a couple of days, and instead of it's amazing here, he doesn't get her saved, it doesn't say. It doesn't say that he counsels her. It says that he commands the Spirit to come out of her. This is some crazy theology. We got the Holy Ghost resisting him from preaching, and now we got him, instead of turning the other cheek and being loving and enduring, he just gets irritated. He goes, come out of her. Boom. The Spirit comes out. And the moment that her owners see that he just cast out her capacity to be able to, after that, she's trying to get stuff, and she's like blinking. I'm not getting it. That guy messed up my frequency here. They're furious. They are the rulers of the marketplace. So if Paul wanted to go meet who the marketplace leaders were, he was about to find them. He wasn't coming in a revival. So they grab them, take them to court. That tells you something. And they accuse them of being troublemakers and basically exceedingly troubling our city. We'll see where that goes in the months and years ahead, when people start blaming you for stuff that you didn't even do just because you're upsetting their status quo. So anyway, they tear their clothes off. They beat them. And at the end of that, Paul and Silas are in a prison. Now, at this point, he can't call a lawyer. He doesn't have one. And what does he do? This is so phenomenal. You won't see a whole lot of references in the New Testament like you'd like to see, considering how much we do worship movements and music is such a big theme in Christian culture. You don't see it as strongly manifest. You don't need a whole lot either. You only need one verse like this, and you could build a whole argument out of this one verse. Paul and Silas decided to sing. They worshiped. They prayed and sang. And they didn't sing quiet. They sang loud enough so the prisoners who were there had to listen to them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken immediately. All the doors were open. Everyone's bands were loose. This is kind of flipped out. They literally have God's in a jailbreak here. This is weird. God's just doing a jailbreak. But none of them left. They all were listening to what Paul and Silas said. Something about these guys drew them in. I guess they knew that a miracle had happened, the earthquake and all that. So the jailer comes in and realizes that in Rome, if you let a prisoner go, you give with your life. That's how they dealt with corrupt jailers. So that basically it was, if someone escaped while they were in your custody, the simple rule was, you don't have to make an argument that I was jumped, I was mugged, someone stole the keys. They just said, well, you're dead. And so the jailer's ready to kill himself because he's got a whole prison empty. This is going to be a hard one to fix. But Paul calls out, don't hurt yourself. Come in here. And the guy then becomes a believer, and with his whole house. And of course, they end up going to his house. And this is one of the most interesting verses in the Bible, because he, with his whole house, gets baptized. They're believing. And they go back to the prison. And the next day, the jailer says, hey, the magistrates are here. And, Paul says, tell them that it wasn't just anybody they beat last night, that we are Roman citizens, that you did something very dangerous. You took Roman citizens, stripped and beat them publicly. Now, Rome had a kind of aristocracy where if you were a Roman, you were not treated as an ordinary subject. So he's basically playing an identity card here in terms of his legal status. And he's saying, if they want us to go out, we're not doing it privately. Let them come here and bring us out and tell them we're Romans, uncondemned. And what they did, basically, it put them in a position where they would be publicly stripped and flogged if Paul pushed it. But Paul doesn't turn the cheek entirely. He turns it enough so that he doesn't require them to be beaten. He does require them to have a heart attack over thinking about what he's going to do next. It's interesting. He's going to do what's necessary to protect the church that he's leaving behind. And the sergeants told the words of the magistrates, and they feared when they heard they were Romans. And they came and besought them. The implication here is very meekly, apologetically. Oh my gosh, how could this happen? Oh, please, could you just go? And so they desired them to depart out of the city. And so they went out of the prison, entered into the house of Lydia. Why? Because Lydia's house is now the home base for the apostolic movement, and the church of Philippi has been planted out of the two households of the jailer, who is a government employee, and the marketplace woman. It's interesting that he didn't work with a synagogue here and didn't plant it in an NGO or a nonprofit. It was marketplace, it was government, and one wonders if some of those prisoners, if they served their time or weren't executed, if they didn't join the church. And they all had, what a testimony that would be. If, you were there 3 or 4 years later, yeah, that guy was in the prison, and there's Lydia over there, and there's the jailer, and great story. So what I want you to catch is this. The keys to transition, there are 4 or 5 that are really huge. I'm just talking about 2. We're going to cover some more this week, and I'm going to give them to you. But it's because the great door is opening right now. The door is opening, and there are many adversaries. And for many of you, the resistance you've been running into, you're going to look back and thank God for the resistance, because the resistance kept you for the right door. And then you're going to, these other ideas about showing up and letting divine appointments take place, including letting whatever knuckleheads attack you, do so, because they're going to be part of your ongoing assignment in terms of like who you're going to reach. Your opposition is actually going to position you to reach a bigger audience. This gives you peace of mind once you see it. I mean, for real. And by the way, while I was in Taiwan this week, working with businessmen and interested in seeing what the government's doing regarding persecution of the global community, I was there meeting with Muslims and Buddhists and Christians who are all under the brutal heel of oppression and tyranny and persecution and brutality in various Asian countries. And while I was there meeting with them, I heard that Bill Maher actually had a video of me or something, and was making fun of the evangelicals who are like me in particular, for calling Donald Trump a Cyrus. So evidently Bill is still like functionally illiterate in terms of what happened. So I'm going to deal with Bill later on this week. And but you can imagine, based on tonight's study, I just see him as an instrument to help get a message out. And so even our enemies are going to build platforms for us because they can't help themselves. God's orchestrating it all together. Check out May 23rd through 26th, San Diego, California. It's in Paradise Point. We're going to be in Paradise. So that'll be interesting. And you guys want to pray? You've been praying for years for God to open doors and do stuff. Well, now's the time. Doors are opening. All right? I'll be talking to you guys soon. God bless. Hi, I'm Lance Wallnau, but you already know that. Did you know that you can subscribe, however? You just push that button right there or over there and ding. Now we're connected. Look forward to seeing you soon.